After the United States of America, now it is China that is sitting on the edge of a massive debt crisis.
Beijing is grappling with a mounting debt crisis. 54 trillion at the end of 2022.
This is the story of a huge change in the Chinese economy.
Unrest is growing in China. Fresh protests have broken out in major cities with hundreds rallying, chanting.
Look at this chart. If you look at the highest debt to GDP ratio countries, you will see Japan, US, Greece, Italy and others. As compared to these countries, if you look at China's official debt to GDP numbers, it is sitting comfortably below 100%. And you will call me a fool to say that China is in crisis. Because while India is moving like snails, China is building more metro lines every year than India has ever built in its history.
China has the largest high-speed rail network in the world. China developed its own train manufacturing company, the CRRC.
And while China builds a skyscraper in 19 days, in the US, it takes 19 days just to get zoning approval. So most people would say that for a country that is so massively building its infrastructure, a debt below 100% of GDP seems fine. But wait a second, this is China that we're talking about. So there is always a hidden story. What most people don't know is that China today has 50 massive ghost cities where nobody's living. There are 65 million housing units that are empty, which are enough to house the entire population of France. And the local governments have started delaying and decreasing salaries of their employees. And when you go beyond the official numbers of China, you will discover a hidden monster. Unofficial estimates state that China's real debt to GDP ratio is not below 100%, it's almost 300%. That's 3 times higher than what Beijing admits. This isn't just debt, this is a debt bomb that is ready to explode. So the question is, how did this Chinese debt bomb come into existence? What will happen if it explodes? Will China collapse due to this economic crisis? And what are the lessons that we need to learn from China's growing debt crisis? But before we move on, I want to quickly thank our education partners of today's episode, which is Scalar School of Business. People, what truly builds a strong economy isn't just policy, it's millions of professionals who can solve real business problems. But India's education system is so messed up that even after spending 20 to 30 lakhs on an MBA, 1 in 4 graduates are still unemployable. This is because most B schools are still teaching frameworks from 2005. While companies today want talent that can solve real-world business problems and leverage AI to drive growth. Which is why Scalar School of Business is revolutionizing business education to solve exactly this problem. They offer a full-time 18-month PGP in Management and Technology based in Bangalore. And this program is so amazing that the syllabus is actually taught by industry leaders who have scaled billion-dollar companies like Uber and McKinsey. And as a part of the curriculum itself, students actually have to build their own business and work on real-world company-sourced projects. In fact, in the first year, students of Scalar School of Business worked on a GTM project for Mokobara, where students received feedback directly from the founders themselves. Scalar has been in the education space for 10 years now, and they already have 1,200 plus hiring partners including Google, Razorpay and MPL. And through their online programs, students have already received a median CTC of 25 lakh rupees. And now, Scalar School of Business is handpicking 60 students for their next batch starting this September. And the best part is, they have scholarships up to 100% available. So if you want to apply for the upcoming batch, the link is in the description and in the comments section. So don't miss this opportunity and apply for Scalar School of Business. To understand China's debt problem, you need to understand how the Chinese government functions. You see, China's government operates very differently from other governments. Why? Because in China, your economic goal is not just a goal, it's a career scorecard. So if you're the government of a province in China and the central government sets a national GDP growth target of 5%, even if you hit that 5%, you won't stand out. You will have to beat the national average to look like a star. And only when you beat those targets, you will get a promotion to a wealthier province or even a shot at becoming a national minister. So your economic performance isn't just a report, it's your resume. So all local governments are in a race to build more, grow faster and hit an extraordinary growth rate. In fact, in China, if you do the bare minimum, your political career will disappear. So what do these local governments do? They go all in. They launch new projects, raise more money, and chase growth at any cost. But this is perfect, isn't it? More competition means more GDP growth, and more GDP growth means China will move ahead in the economic race. So this is perfect, isn't it? Well, unfortunately, there is a twist. This seemingly perfect system has one critical flaw. As it turns out, even though the local governments have extraordinary targets, the local government cannot control the tax revenue and they cannot legally borrow. So let's say you are Mr. Jack. You are the party secretary of a mid-sized city in Henan province. Now, Beijing has announced a national GDP growth target of 5%. And if you want to get noticed in the party, you will set your goal at 6.5%. And that 1.5% over delivery, that's your ticket to a promotion, a bigger city, or even a cabinet role. But here's the problem. Your city is small, your tax revenues are too low, and by law, you are not allowed to borrow money. So you cannot issue bonds either. On top of that, local governments are responsible for around 85% of all public spending. But the problem is that they only receive about 50% of the total tax revenue. So if you collect $2 billion, you will only get $1 billion to spend, and you cannot borrow extra money. So the question is, how do you fund enough economic activity to hit that 6.5% growth? And look at this shocking chart. This chart shows that the local governments are clearly spending more than they receive. So the question is, if the local government cannot borrow, how are they spending more? Well, to understand this, let's go back to Mr. Jack. Mr. Jack doesn't have a lot of money, but he has to hit 6.5% growth, that too without borrowing. And this is where the local government uses an instrument called Local Government Financing Vehicles, or LGFV. And here's how it works. Local Government Financing Vehicle is like a shadow company that's technically not the local government, but it exists only to serve the local government. So it's off the books, but it can borrow money for the local government. Now in China, as we all know, all land technically belongs to the state, but local governments can manage it, lease it, and make money. So in step number 1, the local government takes up a piece of land which is owned by the government. Then they transfer the land to the LGFV on a low price lease. And then the LGFV uses that land as collateral and goes to the bank and says, look guys, I've got this land, it's worth $2 billion. Give me a loan worth $1.5 billion. So the bank lends billions of dollars to the LGFV, assuming that the land will increase in value. In fact, the banks also have this confidence because they think local governments would step in to rescue LGFVs if they encounter financial trouble. So once the LGFV gets the money, then the LGFV uses that money to launch massive projects. So the local state-owned enterprises get the contracts, the developers buy more land around the airport, they borrow from banks, and they start building. They start building a new airport that nobody asked for. They start building a 4-lane highway to nowhere. And they start building a glass and steel business park in the middle of a farmland. So the construction begins, cranes go up, and the GDP starts rising. And just like that, Mr. Jack hits 6.5% growth target. This is how all local governments across China used LGFVs to raise money and hit their GDP targets. But here's where things start to get complicated. When state-owned companies kept getting contracts, they started building one project after another because for them it was steady income and endless work. At the same time, households began pouring in their life savings into real estate because everybody believed that property prices would only go up. And why wouldn't they? China's economy was evidently booming, GDP was rising, and buildings were going up everywhere.
A booming nation of 1.3 billion people whose increasingly prosperous lives are driving development on a scale the world has never seen.
China's economy is growing fast, thanks in part to a real estate boom and government projects.
Developers simply move too fast, and the new buildings appear as quickly as it takes to demolish the old ones. This 30-story hotel went up in just 2 weeks.
So people thought, if I don't buy now, I will never be able to afford it later. And by 2020, you will be shocked to know that Chinese families had put over 70% of their wealth into property. But the problem was that many of those buildings were never really needed. Why? Because huge construction projects were launched in places with no demand at all. And that led to the rise of something called ghost cities. These cities had shiny buildings, wide roads, even subways. But the problem was that nobody was living there. In fact, cities were built for 1 million people, but only a few thousand occupied it. Now, when these ghost cities were discovered, the people of China started seeing the cracks in the Chinese economy. For example, there is a project called Kangbashi in Ordos. This project was built for 1 million residents, but today it has less than 10% occupancy. Similarly, Yujiapu in Tianjin was supposed to be China's Manhattan, but today it is filled with empty office towers and no rental income. So massive amounts of money got invested there, but there was no rent being generated. And this is where a dangerous vicious cycle started. More construction meant higher GDP figures. Higher GDP meant better career prospects and promotion for local officials. So the officials started to approve even the most unnecessary construction projects. And all of this was funded by the LGFV borrowing. And this fragile flywheel finally began to wobble in 2021 with the infamous Evergrande crisis.
Evergrande, once one of China's most successful developers, has struggled to pay its debt for months.
Recently there has been too much bad news surrounding this name.
China Evergrande is Beijing's biggest worry right now.
This is a story of the failure of one of China's and also the world's largest real estate developers.
For those who don't know, we covered this story 3 years ago, where Evergrande, one of China's largest property developers, faced a severe liquidity crisis because it was unable to meet its massive debt obligations. And with over $300 billion in liabilities, Evergrande's financial troubles caused widespread panic and shook the confidence of the entire real estate sector. So suddenly, developers stopped buying land. In 2022, the local government saw their revenues go down by 50% in many regions. And without steady land revenues, the LGFVs lost their revenue. And when they lost their revenue, their debts piled up and caused a massive ballooning of debt. And to make matters worse, with a sudden halt in the real estate market, the property prices started crashing and left millions of Chinese citizens in deep trouble. Look at this. By late 2023, China's LGFV debt reached an astounding 60 to 66 trillion yuan, which is almost 8 to 9 trillion dollars. You know how much money that is? It's twice the GDP of India and nearly 50% of China's entire GDP. In fact, when the LGFVs couldn't pay the debt, many provinces struggled to even pay basic salaries to civil servants. This is how the cracks in the Chinese economic miracle began to show up. Local governments buried in debt, developers in crisis, and households trapped in sinking mortgages. So the question is, with $9 trillion in hidden debt, with ghost cities with 1 million empty apartments, and with real estate making up 25 to 30% of the entire Chinese economy, you would expect China to be in a full-blown crisis by now, right? So why hasn't this debt exploded? And why aren't we seeing an economic crisis in China? Well, that is because the Chinese government is buying time to fix this crisis. And this is where Beijing announced something called the debt swap program. But what exactly does this mean? And how on earth can this debt swap program save China from an economic disaster? Well, let's understand this using a very simple example. Imagine you have 5 credit cards, all maxed out with 1 lakh rupees in debt at a high interest rate of 20%. Now you know for a fact that you cannot pay this loan in 45 days with a 20% interest. So what do? You go to the bank and cut a deal in such a way that you turn all 5 lakhs into a single loan to be paid in 2 years with an interest of 15%. So you combine all 5 lakhs into a single loan with a lower interest and buy more time to pay it off. Simple, right? This is what China is doing. Beijing has taken all the hidden debt from the local governments and has turned it into official government bonds. That means, just like our credit card example, the government will pay lower interest, they will have longer repayment time, and the debt now appears on the books legally and doesn't remain illegal. So, does it solve the problem? Not at all. This just gives China more time to pay back the debt. But the problem is that China has to pay back a massive 10 trillion yuan, as in $1.4 trillion between 2023 and 2024. Secondly, Chinese regulators have directed major state-owned banks to slow down loan recoveries. In simple words, the government has told the banks to decrease interest and give them more time to pay the debt back. So now China is at a turning point. Either the government will find a way out, manage the debt, fix the system, and bounce back stronger than ever, or they will get into more defaults, more job losses, and a slowdown that affects the entire world. And this story has three very, very important lessons for India. Lesson number 1, growth without demand is a mirage. In this case, we saw China build thousands of projects, airports, highways, and entire cities before there was any real demand. It looked like growth on paper, but underneath it was concrete without purpose. So the lesson for India is that infrastructure must follow real needs and not just targets. We must build not just to show GDP numbers, but to build a strong foundation for our economy. Lesson number 2, transparency is not optional, it is a protection. In this case, China's biggest weakness wasn't the debt itself, it is how deeply hidden that debt became. So in India, we need to make sure that our governments make every rupee borrowed or spent visible and trackable, because hidden debt is a ticking time bomb. And lastly, we all need to remember that incentives can drive the system for both better or worse. In this case, in China, local officials were rewarded for hitting GDP targets no matter how they hit them. That is the reason why they built ghost cities to show on-paper growth just to get promoted. So the lesson for India over here is that we must rethink what we reward. We must incentivize long-term impact and not just short-term construction. If at all we need to incentivize something, we need to incentivize job creation, productivity, and sustainability, and not just infrastructure spend. This is the story of China's debt crisis and the lessons that India must learn from China. That's all from my side for today, guys. If you learned something valuable, please make sure to the like button in order to make YouTube happy. And for more such insightful business and political case studies, please subscribe to our channel. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next one. Bye bye.